Batman has been saving Gotham for decades, and with so much time spent kicking criminal butt, he has come across quite a few villains that have faded into obscurity. Today on Top 10 Nerd, it's the top 10 Batman villains you've probably never heard of. Probably. Number 10, Killer Moth. Killer Moth, unlike a lot of the characters on this list, isn't really that powerful, but that's not what makes them underrated and in need of more attention. Killer Moth is just fun. Drury Walker first appeared all the way back in Batman number 63 from February of 1951, and his whole shtick is just goofy. While other characters have taken their inspiration from having similar backstories to the Batman, the Killer Moth wanted to be the criminal's version of Batman, so he got himself a moth signal and a mothmobile and the name of Killer Moth. So scary. Not really. He even set up a false identity as millionaire philanthropist Cameron Van Clear. In that form, he became friends with Bruce Wayne, which is actually interesting. I doubt he even knew about Bruce's hobby of Bat cosplay, but meanwhile, he promoted himself to Gotham's criminals using his identity as Killer Moth, giving them each an infrared moth signal to call him to their aid. Now, he didn't really fight for them. Instead, he kind of just became the distraction for the authorities so the real criminals could get away. You see why he really didn't become so popular? It's just kind of hilarious, and although his character has evolved a bit by then, no one has taken him that seriously, so just like Kite Man, he needs his time to shine. Number 9, Calendar Man. Julian Gregory Day, whose name is a pun on the Julian and Gregorian calendars, has an obsession with dates. Committing crimes that always have a relationship to the date that they are being committed on, usually covering the major holidays. Like most of the messed up members of the Batman's Rogues Gallery, Calendar Man has a rough childhood. His parents neglected him, which almost resulted in his passing away from days of exposure, which in turn resulted in his complete psychotic obsession of days and holidays. I don't know how those two mix, that's just how it goes. First appearing in Detective Comics number 259 in September 1958, Calendar Man was a bit sillier, using different costumes to commit crimes based on the days of the calendar, like dressing as an Indian magician representing the monsoon season. But after the Crisis on Infinite Earths, Calendar Man was barely used and got a great revamp by writer Jeff Loeb in Batman The Long Halloween. In this new version, Calendar Man was institutionalized in Arkham Asylum and was deemed as an insane, ruthless criminal with abbreviations of the months tattooed around his head in a circle with no silly costumes or ridiculous crimes. Just his name. Number 8. Wrath. A young, successful, and secretly entirely evil CEO, Wrath is capable of being both Batman and Bruce Wayne's #1 nemesis and antithesis, and yet almost no one cares or knows about him. Wrath first appeared back in 1984 as basically an anti-Batman, and while that may sound like a lazy writing exercise and may make you think he won't be popular, he did it before the major villain Prometheus ever even conceived of the idea. Wrath's parents were two burglars who were accidentally taken from this plane of existence by a young police officer who stumbled upon them and thought they were robbing their own house. As you can imagine, this is quite the villain backstory to turn a young Wrath completely against the law. He then dedicated his whole existence to going against them. Wrath even ended up training a young ward of his own named Elliot Caldwell, who you might have guessed became his version of Robin. Caldwell eventually takes on the role of Wrath himself, filling in his mentor's shoes, and he remained as the villain after the New 52 reboot, and yet Wrath is nowhere to be seen, and you basically probably never heard of him, and you probably never will. Number 7, Colonel Sulphur. This Denny O'Neil created villain from the 70s is an espionage expert with weaponized artificial hands, a tool he has used to commit very espionage type crimes. He's very Bond villainy if we're being honest. Colonel Sulphur has a strange sunlight fixation, meaning he only allows himself to act on his violent urges in the quote morning's earliest minutes, which is one hell of a specific yet very obscure time frame for criminal activity. He did actually prove to be a bit more of a threat though when he joined the Army of Crime. When the Army of Crime's activities were challenged by Batman and Superman, Sulphur used an alien weapon to trap Superman and Batman in a timeless dimension. Sulphur used stolen tools of the trade to take over Gotham City, but as you may suspect, he was soon stopped by Batman and Superman, who had escaped from the timeless dimension. These things happen, man, they're superheroes, sorry dude. Number 6, Condiment King. When the villainous Condiment King came on the scene, it was literally on the scene, as he appeared in the animated Batman TV show from 1992, one of the best, honestly. Condiment King was Buddy Stantler, a comedian who was brainwashed by the Joker into becoming a villain. He wields condiment squirters and viciously horrible puns. Stuff like, "I knew you'd catch up to me sooner or later," or "How I've relished this meeting." "Come Batman, let's see if you can cut the mustard." You get the idea, that was stuff like that. The puns get even worse in the comics, with his real name becoming a pun on its own. Mitchell Mayo. I am not joking. He is not taken seriously by anyone, including all of us. His weapons don't actually project his condiments at a speed fast enough to do anyone harm, but they sure are inconvenient, leaving nasty stains in your superhero costumes. On the other hand, he does potentially have the ability to be able to cause anaphylactic shock if he's battling someone with an allergy. Number 5. Flamingo. Eduardo Flamingo, known as Flamingo, is a world-famous serial taker of life and an assassin. He is well known for a specific thing he does, which inspired his sometimes name of the Eater of Faces, which really just explains itself. Eduardo was actually a morally strong advocate and fighter against organized crime, but that all changed when he was captured and underwent forced brain surgery that altered his personality, making him dangerously psychotic. Now, the incredibly colorful Flamingo is an enforcer and assassin, rocking a very unique look and somehow totally making a pink motorcycle not look silly. He has a dark, unfeeling personality and is an expert marksman, which makes up for his lack of powers and makes him a pretty dangerous threat for Batman. He has even temporarily paralyzed Damian Wayne, so think twice before you judge, cause he'll chew your face off, literally. Number 4. Lord Deathman. The Japanese crime boss known as Lord Deathman has battled Batman both in American comics and in Japanese manga, using his powers to seemingly overcome death itself, able to rise from the grave no matter what his injury is. In his first appearance in Batman 180 in May of 1966, he passed away a total of 3 times using a yogi technique to appear passed away before the final conflict, which saw him get struck by lightning and actually pass away. But since then, he has actually gained the real power to come back from the dead, but at the cost of having a bare bone skull for a head. I don't know why. His regenerative abilities are so powerful that his sweet red is used to create the infamous Lazarus pits that Ra's al Ghul uses to stay young and immortal. One of the first ways Batman defeated Lord Deathman with his new powers is honestly a little out of character for the Crusader. He threw Lord Deathman off a building into the path of an armored car, which took the criminal down just long enough for Catwoman to lock him in a safe, and then he was shot out into space. And he still somehow came back. Number 3. Pig. Professor Pig is a villain that came to be during a time when Batman stories were becoming incredibly dark, and Pig himself has to be one of the darkest villains of that time. His methods completely disgust the Dark Knight and also most of us. He looks like a character straight out of a horror or a slasher movie, and his obsession with physical perfection, like the myth of Pygmalion, which is where his name comes from, became part of the reason that he turned his victims into his own mind-controlled servants called Dolotrons. If his crimes weren't horrifying enough, then I mean, just look at him. Yikes. No! Number 2. Humpty Dumpty. With his house being demolished, his dog being run over, and his parents being crushed by a Christmas tree on Christmas, things were not looking too great for Humphrey Dumpler. He was mistreated by his grandmother, who he was forced to live with, and because of his appearance and mental capacity, he was also bullied. Of all things, the last straw for Humphrey was missing a subway train. Humphrey was obsessed with fixing things, and since the missing of the subway train, he started going out late at night to disassemble and reassemble mechanical devices which had upset him in some way or another. But since he wasn't very intelligent and all the info he got was from books, the things he fixed and reassembled actually caused a lot of accidents. The first thing was the same train that he missed, which then crashed due to his manipulation. Now, going by Humpty Dumpty, he was tracked down by Batgirl, who dislocated her shoulder trying to save him. Humpty fixed her shoulder, but then he also revealed that he had evolved from disassembling devices to disassembling and reassembling people. Namely, his grandmother, who he believed to have been broken and in need of repair. So he took her apart, then attempted to sew her back together again with bootlace. That got dark. And in at number 1 today, it's Cornelius Stirk. Cornelius Stirk is one of those villains that you don't hear about much, but is one of the more gruesome and terrifying members of Batman's rogues gallery. Stirk suffers from delusions which make him believe that he requires the nutrients of a human heart in order to stay alive, and not just any heart. Specifically, Cornelius believes that the heart is the most nutritious when it is full of norepinephrine, a natural hormone that secretes when a person is terrified, as well as adrenaline. So he uses his unexplained psionic ability to mentally make people perceive him as someone else, which, other than allowing him to break out of Arkham Asylum the first time, also allowed him to get close to his victims and then completely terrify them in the most insane ways before he quickly ends them and partakes in a nice old hearty meal. Pun intended. I think the interesting thing about Stirk though is that he is actually really effective at what he does, being able to evade Batman and even render him unconscious on one occasion. And that's all I got. Thank you guys so much for watching on Top 10 Nerd. I'll catch you all on the flippy flop. Peace out, nerds.